To the best of 2025 and looking ahead to 2026. Welcome to a special year in review episode of the Just Meee podcast. A heartfelt thank you to all our wonderful guests for 2025. To you as listeners and the supporters who've made, last year such a meaningful year. It really was. I always think with every year there's always kind of bittersweet reflections, people that we've lost, people who've come into the world, kind of new people being born. So there's always kind of moments of sadness for me and loss, but also growth and, in every way, hope. I always sort of towards the end of the year kind of reflect on people that have kind of been and gone and what remarkable individuals they were. And I think it's only sometimes when people pass away that you really get time to reflect. During Christmas, a neighbour of ours was walking down the road, Ken, and said to him, "How are you?" And he said, "Oh, I'm not so good." He said, "I've just lost my wife." She was, so they were married for 62 years. Incredible. And he said, "I'm at a total loss." He said, "There won't be 12 of us for Christmas dinner. There'll only be 11. But he said, "I must keep going." And then I saw him a few days later and I said, "How are you?" He said, "I'm sorry about the other day." He said, "I got a bit upset." And I said, "No." I said, "No, absolutely. It means so much to you and to your family." But the thing that was amazing, he's in his 80s, but his whole kind of outlook was, come on, got to keep going. There's always something to live for, which was just lovely. When you think of some of the people that have died in 2025, like Jane Goodall, who became a voice for nature and animals. Her love of primates sparked a global environmental movement and revolution in some way for people to think about kind of primates in a different way. The wonderful actor, Robert Redford, who are amazing, as the founder of the Sundance Foundation, to champion independent films. He was in one of the movies that certainly kind of set my kind of fascination of film, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, when I was a kid. Tom Stoppard, amazing playwright. And, one of his great quotes that I just love is that theatre is recreation. It must entertain. And it's so true. I said to my sister years ago that life is theatre and that everything is a play, everything is a set. And I remember her kind of looking at me thinking I was completely bonkers. But it is. Even when you go to a cafe or you're out in a supermarket, wherever you are, there's a little cameo, there's a little play going on, there's something you could write about, like a little observation. And, one of my heroes, Leonardo da Vinci, love him and his work. Used to carry a notebook around with him all the time and make notes and do drawings. He studied things, he was incredibly curious about life. And I think for me, that's what life is. It's that curiosity to kind of keep looking and observing. So yes, Tom Stoppard, theatre is recreation, it must entertain. Think of Ozzy Osbourne, amazing kind of Birmingham-born rock icon, a cultural figure. Did so much for kind of culture, but also for rock. Felix Baumgartner, that extreme athlete who pushed beyond human limits in many ways. And when he did his 2012 space jump, I remember watching that. I think it was sponsored by Red Bull. Just thinking, how can somebody do that? Sadly, he died in an accident, last year. Dame Cleo Laine, an amazing, iconic jazz singer. And she said something which I loved. She said, "I feel alive when I sing." And I've got, 3 young children and an older one too. But I know that, my sort of middle daughter B, when she sings and she performs, she just comes alive. It's just wonderful to see. Freddie, my son, started playing rugby last year and he just comes alive. He's struggling with school. He's well behind on his reading and his writing and his arithmetic and stuff. But as soon as you put him a rugby jersey on him and he goes out into the rugby field, he just comes alive, which is just so lovely. And he was playing last year in the wind and the rain. Just caked in mud, literally from head to foot, but just beaming smile. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? Dame Cleo Laine, I feel alive when I sing. And for me, that's a great reminder of what makes you feel alive. You know, Chris Rea came from huge poverty, didn't he? And, you know, he wrote Driving Home for Christmas. I think he was in his car with his girlfriend. He had been banned from driving, lost his license. And he literally just wrote the song, you know, Driving Home for Christmas, which has become, you know, a massive festive anthem. Brian Wilson, you know, founder of the Beach Boys, who was a musical genius. You know, he co-founded the band with his brothers and shaped, you know, the iconic California music sound of the 1960s, pioneering studio techniques. And I was watching a program the other day, actually, where Richard Ashcroft, singer, reached out to Brian Wilson a couple of years ago and said, would you mind doing some backing vocals or some harmony for a track that he had written? And Brian Wilson did and sent it to him, and it was amazing. And Richard Ashcroft actually described, he said, it's like listening to the voice of an angel. Just amazing, you know, work and contribution. You know, the Beach Boys, you know, gave birth to the Beatles and many other iconic bands. He was deaf in one ear, deeply introspective, I mean, he really was. But he turned his personal pain into timeless music, and he leaves behind a legacy of harmony and vulnerability and genius that changed the course of popular music. And I think so many geniuses, so many people, whether it's in the arts or wherever they are, they leave that mark on the world, don't they? That story of that narrative of how they arrived at what they were doing and how they created. And so many people have done it out of pain, huge amount of, you know, personal and mental anguish and torment. Other people sadly died last year. Diane Keaton, Gene Hackman, Bridget Bardot, who recently passed away, Patricia Routledge, you know, Madame Bouquet, brilliant actress. You know, and so many legends of the art world that you know, shaped, you know, so many things that we do today. And I know that you know, watching programmes, and there's one on the BBC Two the other day actually called Lives Well Lived, and it went through a lot of the people, Cleo, Laine, you know, and many others, and talked about their contribution and how they arrived at what they were doing. And, you know, Cleo Laine mentioned that her father, who was born in Jamaica, used to recite and play her a lot of the old kind of classics and teach her them. And she said that's where my foundation came from, and that's where she found, you know, her great playlist of things that she could do. So, you know, we're influenced by so many people, whether it's parents or each other. And I think that's what I loved about that documentary. And obviously, you know, I mentioned the Beach Boys. You know, there's also Reuters, the news service. They have a memorial page every year, which is a hugely touching resource of just things that people have done and people have gone before. And you think of George Foreman, the amazing boxer, you know, and what he did and what he achieved. And another program that I watched, you know, recently was programmed by Chris Hoy and Sarra Hoy called Cancer, Courage and Meee. Just an amazing documentary about amazing people. Not just the two of them, but all the other Olympians and the people who have supported them, training partners, you know, training managers and all the rest. But just a great reminder of resilience, you know, in the face of, God, 2 dual diagnoses. You know, Chris has got cancer and Sarah's got MS. You know, one of the things that Sarah mentioned in there was, you know, that it's an honour to stand by his side, you know, and be with him and to do what they did. And they did a charity bike ride, which is the Tour de Four, I think it was called, which again was about raising awareness of stage 4 cancer. And so many people turned up. There was a lady who had lost a lung. You know, she was cycling, and Chris and Sarah was just saying that so many people just get together and do great things. You know, just amazing people doing amazing things. And I think, you know, the thing for me was that we all have that capacity to help, regardless of whatever situation that we're in. Not just with grand gestures, and they're great, but it's through those kind of small little moments of being present and being compassionate. And I think for me, you know, as a dad, you know, as a kind of adult now, I say now, it's like I don't know if I'll ever be a true adult. I don't think I'll ever truly grow up. But I think for me, it's that responsibility of being present, living in the moment, the power of now, as Eckhart Tolle kind of talks about. But it's that sense of compassion and that sense of joy that we can share with everybody. I read I read lots of books last year, but one of the books that really hit home to me was a guy called Paul Dix. When the parents change, everything changes. It's brilliant, and it's all about being calm and setting the tone of being calm. And it's not about kind of punishing, it's about repairing things, it's about getting routines together, behavior rooted in relationships and how those relationships, affect yourself and others. And that change starts with us. It's very easy to kind of look out and kind of go, oh yeah, I want this to change. But really change does start with us. I mean, it really does. Another great book that I read this year was Jonathan Haidt. And it was about the anxious generation. It was the essential reading for the digital age, which is brilliant. I mean, the guy's an amazing author. And he talks about, the creation of the iPhone and the camera with the phone and how it's affected people, especially youngsters, and how he advocates that really we shouldn't be giving smartphone to teenagers or young people until at least 15 or 16, which I have to say I do agree with. When you think of so much of my childhood when I grew up was just playing outside, getting on a bike, falling over, and now it's moved much more into digital where kids are staying in, which is fine. But, a friend of mine who teaches my children swim, I mean, she's two sons, both just done their GCSEs and A-levels and done incredibly well, A-stars all the way through. But they're both anxious, they can't get on the bus and travel. And I kind of think sometimes that, what are we teaching our children to be? Great that they can recite maths, English, whatever it is. But if we're not teaching them the life skills of being confident or not being anxious, of enjoying going out, like my kids, I mean, girls have just started playing netball. They love it, absolutely love it. Got hoodies and all sorts, and the netball teachers are immense, brilliant people. All that energy of kind of being together, being a team. And I think for me, that's why the Jonathan Haidt book, The Anxious Generation, is so brilliant. He says that, we have to build emotional resilience through independence. We have to teach our kids and youngsters and ourselves to be independent. Avoid overprotection. Encourage that whole thing about play and risk-taking. It's important. Phones and social media have a direct link to anxiety. And, this last year, the brilliant podcast with the most fantastic Ellen Room, who sadly lost her son, Jules. And it was all to do with social media, and she's taking TikTok, to court in the US and the UK, and trying to change the laws about control of data and who's allowed to have that data. Screen use replacing real world relationships. Why? It's not. I mean, when I grew up, the best that you could get was kind of pen pals, and people used to write to each other from around the world. And the thing is that, phones are shaping a generation. It is time to act and say, look, we've got to stop this. I find myself scrolling sometimes endlessly through mindless rubbish. I mean, I've just started playing golf again after a break of 7 years. And I love it. I just love going out, getting on the course for 7, 8 o'clock in the morning when it's barely light, and just playing on my own with somebody else, whatever. But it's that physical interaction of the outside world that we need to do more of. We really do. There's a great podcast that I discovered last year called The Rest is History. Just fantastic. I think there are about 700 one-hour episodes in there, and they cover things like Hitler, Churchill, the Christmas truce, which was one actually they did for Christmas, where soldiers on both sides of the trenches in the First World War kind of got out and played football and shared, kind of memories and became friends or whatever. How true it is and how often it happened, I don't think anyone really knows. But it certainly did happen in certain places where, somebody started singing Silent Night, in German, then in English or whatever. And I think it's that, for me, it was that kind of the lifting the lid of humanity, that however hard, conflict is, and, let's be honest, the world's a pretty unhappy place at the moment. There's always signs of wonderful humanity. And I think for me, the rest is history. The thing that I love about it is, yes, I've listened to podcasts on Nelson and Napoleon and Elizabeth I and lots of other great kind of people. But it's just interesting how, they've arrived at what they were doing. And you think of Lord Nelson and the Battle of Trafalgar and all the things around it. I mean, it's worth having a listen. Delving into that one really is. And the thing is that it's all about storytelling, the past and the present. And it teaches us, it grounds us, and it connects us. And I was never a great fan of history because I could never remember all the dates and all the things that happened. But listening to the Rest is History podcast, it becomes absolutely fascinating with all the little things that you can kind of learn about people, especially kind of Lord Nelson and HMS Victory, which was the ship that he was on in the Battle of Trafalgar, and all of the backstories behind it. There was also one recently about Jack the Ripper and their theories about who that could have been. Again, well worth listening and kind of connecting for that. And at Christmas last year, I took the children to church, at All Saints Church in Deganwy. We do it when I have them. We do it every other year. And the Reverend Sarah, who takes the service, wonderful lady. And she asked a great question, actually. She said, if it could be Christmas every day, what would we think? And we all kind of went, no, I don't really want that. Because it would just become the norm, wouldn't it? But one of the great things that she said, what is the sentiment of Christmas? It's that togetherness, isn't it? Hopefully for many people. And she said, what else does Christmas kind of bring about? Obviously gifts, And I mentioned, kindness. And she said, absolutely. She said, one of the most underrated things in the world is kindness. And, could we have Christmas every day? Well, we could certainly have that sentiment of kindness every day. And I think for me, the spirit of Christmas and really the spirit of every day is around that kindness, compassion, and that togetherness. My neighbour Liz, she's 97. It's amazing. Honestly, she's an amazing woman. She lost her husband, I think 15, 20 years ago. And she grew up, she had 3 brothers, elder brothers, 1 younger sister. She grew up in North Wales in Blaenau Festiniog. Her father was blind by the age of 15, not sure what happened. I think there was he was playing in a mine and maybe got sepsis or something. She wasn't quite sure, but he was blind at the age of 15. But she said he never complained about it. They never got any help. He refused a white stick, to guide him. And she said he was always laughing. He was always making the most out of things. And one of her brothers went off to the Second World War and, sadly was killed. But they made the most out of everything. And she said that she doesn't think people do anymore, that we kind of sit back. I mean, she's amazing. She had a fall last year, as she calls it, a tumble. And, she had to go to hospital. I mean, luckily she didn't break anything. But, she had a lot of medical services and care services around her for a while. But she couldn't wait to get rid of them. I mean, her daughter Sian came to stay with her and her husband Pete. And she just said to them, go, I don't need your help. And she's got a little key fob thing or a little panic button or whatever that she presses. But she's so fiercely independent. And, I take the kids round there and kind of share stories. Well, actually, no, I don't share stories with her. I just listen to her. She's an amazing person. And I think we lose so much, don't we, when we don't ask people for their stories. I really do. Everyone has a story. Some are quite remarkable. I mentioned Cleo, Laine, Robert Redford, Bridget Bardot, Brian Wilson, all of those people, amazing stories, amazing. And, I've been a single dad now for, nearly 6 years. And I think for me, the thing that I remember about my kids and being a dad is the stories, it's the feeling of taking them down on Christmas morning and they're opening the door to the lounge and I took a little video and, we were singing Happy Christmas in the morning and just the joy that it gave them. Obviously, I know it's around presents, it's around giving, but just the joy that, it gives you. But I've been on my own now for 6 years, and I love it. I really do. And it's just lovely sharing moments, with them of patience and love. And, their school put on a play for the bigger kids called Bar Humbug. And I watched the first performance. I was sat at the back next to two of the kids who were on the mixing desk, and Mr. Griffiths, who was one of the teachers, amazing teachers there. And I watched this performance, and I've seen many performances in many theatres, around the world, and obviously the ones that I was part of in school. Just one of the best things I've ever seen. Just the way that even the kids who were bringing on the the stage changes, the set changes, brilliant. I was talking to one of the mums, afterwards, and she said that her lad had basically asked for more speaking parts because he really enjoyed it and he'd never been in a play. And the thing that I loved about the performance was it was so complete. Everybody had a part to play, whether you were sat down singing. I mean, my son was doing a dancing part. He hates acting, hates anything to do with singing. But there he was on the stage dressed as a kind of a Victorian, office clerk, dancing with a young, a young girl. And he loved it, absolutely loved it. And after the performance, I wrote to the head of Conway Education and just said, look, I really do think that you should send somebody to watch this performance because it's amazing of the amount of effort that, that all the people had kind of, Miss Whitworth, who was, one of the leads on putting it all together, the amount of energy, the amount of work that they'd put in. And the next day they sent somebody. And what was lovely is that the person who went stood up at the end and obviously said it was fantastic and said that the reason why they'd gone is because of an email from somebody who said, look, go and see this. This is a real celebration of what people can do. No mobile phones, no digital stuff, nothing. I mean, obviously there was iPads at the back to put in all the kind of sound effects and stuff that Owen and another young lady were doing. But what was lovely is that it was just the joy of being together, of doing stuff. And this education officer just said it's just such a joy to see people doing stuff together. And I know that the emphasis is on kind of, the sciences and all the rest of it, but let's not lose that cultural stuff that makes us, truly creative human beings, which we are. And I think, if you can, saying thank you, as I did to, obviously said to the school, brilliant performance. And, I said to one of the teachers, have you told anyone about this? No, it's just for us. And I said, you need to. This is like a real celebration of what you can do as a little school, tiny little school in North Wales. And I think it's to encourage people to send emails to say thank you, write a card. I children and I sat down before Christmas. I think we did 30 Christmas cards. I mean, they got a little bit bored writing their names and drawing pictures in all of them. But I said the joy that it will give the people that we send these to will be amazing. And they loved it. And it's really lovely sending somebody a card. And I sent one gave one to a friend of mine, and she said, oh, I don't do Christmas cards, I'm saving the trees. And I said, well, actually, maybe you should. I know trees are important, don't get me wrong. But just the joy of sending a recycle card to somebody can mean so much, it really can. So let's look ahead to 2026, a new year, a new story. And I think for me, don't worry about controlling the outcomes. Focus on control what you can control, which is that kindness, the process, your purpose. Something that Chris and Sarra Hoy mentioned was that, when Chris Hoy was, just about to win his first gold, he worried about his training and the people who were, he was up against. We were all breaking world records as they were kind of doing the heats and stuff. And one of his coaches said to him, stick to the process. You know how to ride a bike. Ride it the best you can. Don't worry about the end result. That'll be what it will be. Sure enough, got a world record, got a gold. And I think that's what's important, is stick to your process, stick to being kind, of worrying about, not worrying about, but doing the next thing the best that you can. And the thing is that, we're all in different seasons of life. Embrace it. I'm 62, I'll be 63 this year. I kind of like being 60. I mean, admittedly, the body's not kind of like, it's a little bit creaky, a little bit cranky. But I enjoy the fact that I've lived for 6 decades of good stuff. I've had a great life. And I'm hoping to have more of a great life. So again, embrace that life, be yourself, help others, and let's look after each other. So here we go, some final thoughts. Think about, who are your heroes? My heroes are my children, the joy they bring. And for me, they're a great mirror of, Sid, are you being a good dad? Are you doing the best that you can? Think about what keeps you going. Go out. I mean, one of the things, actually, we moved office last year. And in the new office building that we've got, a number of different businesses. It's publishing business, an accountant, digital business and whatever. And 2 of the other business owners or business people in the office, I mean, we go out for a walk at 12 o'clock every day for about an hour. About 2-3 miles, sometimes go for a swim in the sea. Yes, that's cold. But it's great. And one of the chaps, actually, AJ, says that one of his highlights of his day is going out for that walk. So if you can, go out for a walk. I know that one of the listeners and one of the people on one of our courses a few years ago, Sarah, started doing that in December and does park run and volunteers and stuff. Get active, go out, do stuff. Find somebody to go for a walk with. I don't know, borrow a dog. Do something and, be yourself, help others and look after each other, as I mentioned there. And the thing is that, what's your story? What's your story going to be? And the Meee podcast for 2026, they're going to focus on story. I think it's such a powerful thing. The ones we live, the ones we tell, and the ones we'll shape. And really thank you, for being here. And let's keep going. And let's keep going together. And do it with kindness and love, with friendship and creativity, and all the things that makes us wonderful human beings. And thank you to all the people who've gone before, the legends. Whether they're well known or not well known, there are legends. And thank you. Have a great 2026. Goodbye.